Welcome to University of Phoenix Educational Equity Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us today in our webinar on the voices and perspectives of an intergenerational workforce. We look forward to hearing from our panel and speakers today. My name, next slide. We're a little bit too excited, I think, to get us started. It's going to be such an amazing conversation. So my name is Saray Lopez. I'm the director in the Office of Educational Equity here at University of Phoenix. I have the honor of co-hosting this monthly webinar series with my colleague, Tanda Richardson, fellow director in this office. The Educational Equity Webinar Series was designed to foster a learning environment where we may explore paths to empower individual action for greater unity and societal transformation. These conversations are a priority at University of Phoenix because we serve the working adult across all industries, in which 56% of these students identify as members of historically underrepresented communities. Hence, throughout these webinars, we facilitate thought-provoking conversations to promote the practice of inclusive leadership in today's culturally complex society. Next slide. Today, we would like to begin this webinar by acknowledging the original inhabitants of all the lands on which we are standing. So while we meet virtually, I invite you to join me to honor and give gratitude to the indigenous peoples who were the original custodians of the various lands which we each call home. We do recognize that a land acknowledgement alone is insufficient, yet it serves as a starting point as we continue our individual journeys towards racial equity. So here in Phoenix metropolitan area, we inhabit the Hohokam, Akimet O'odham, Pipash, and Yavapai lands. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to honor the original custodians of the lands on which we stand. Next slide. Next, we want to raise awareness of the significant equity, diversity, and inclusion dates and milestones throughout history. We do acknowledge there may be some dates missing and do invite you to share in the chat if there's an observance line within the month of August. Make sure you do include a link with resources, any details, so we can learn more about its significance. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Tanda to get us started.
Thank you, Saray, and thank you all for joining us. I hope that our music that we started with kind of got you going. Thanks to our Platinum support team for providing us with that soundtrack of what they titled Multigenerational Music to get the mood started for this discussion today. So speaking of our discussion and this ongoing discussion that we're having with our webinar series, if we can move to the next slide, please. We want to make sure that we also promote our next educational equity webinar that will be taking place next month on Thursday, September 15th. We will be talking about facilitating belonging and do trainings on diversity actually work. We know that you all have numerous workshops and webinars available at your fingertips. We do promise you to provide some new information regarding diversity trainings and how you can help contribute to a more inclusive workplace. So please join us for that. I hope I've rambled on enough for you to scan the QR code here on the slide. We've also provided a link for you in the chat. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's set the stage for today's discussion. Here are the guidelines we believe essential to fostering respectful conversations. We value your participation in potentially uncomfortable discussions as this reinforces our willingness to learn and grow. We encourage you to share your experience and perspective in the chat box. We ask all participants to contribute, to an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. In addition, as stated in the chat, we highly encourage you to connect with one another, share your LinkedIn profile and helpful resources related to today's topic. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The questions will be answered at the end of this session as time allows. So as those questions come up, don't hold them. Please, again, make sure that you use the Q&A box, because if you put them in the chat, they can get lost. We can move to the next slide, please. Now we'd like to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers today. First, we have Dr. Mallory Titel, who will be our moderator, and she will introduce our panelists. But before I turn it over to Dr. Titel, I just want to mention Dr. Zachary Shirley. He's unable to join us today. Unfortunately, he has been one of those victims of the canceled flights that many of us have endured recently. So we hope to have him featured in a future webinar. I'll now turn it over to you, Dr. Titel. And you're on mute. We need to take you off mute.
Really?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone who is here. I'm delighted to be here. I am, as Tondra said, I'm Mallory Titel. I've done this work for a very long time. And I'm certainly committed to this work, as everyone who is here is as well. I'm president and founder of an organization called Healthy Workplaces, and it's a practice that helps organizations create healthy, productive, inclusive, and sustainable environments. And we use the word environment because that encompasses both the workplace, or I should say all the workplace, campus, as well as our communities. As I said, I'm delighted to be here with these talented individuals. And I too am sorry that Dr. Shirley is not here. However, we're using up his time. So I'm delighted to have time for additional questions and additional conversation and discussion as well. So I'm going to very briefly introduce the other panelists, and our process here today is that as they take their first question, they will give you their own brief bios and tell you something about themselves as well. So first there's John Ramirez, who is the Dean of Operations at the University of Phoenix College of Doctoral Studies. Next, we have Erica Scott, who is an HR executive, culture creator, and a veteran advocate here in Arizona. Finally, we have Caleb Robinson, who is a recent Howard University graduate and a public affairs intern at SKDK in Washington, D.C. And so what I'd like to do before I turn the floor over to John is let's sort of to just create a context, if you will. I'm going to just share two quotes with you. I'm a quote person, and I just want to share two quotes with you. One is by Karen Draper, and she says that diversity doesn't look like anyone. It actually looks like everyone. And I really appreciate that. The second is from Gareth Morgan, who is a consultant and researcher. And his words are, an organization has no presence beyond that of the people who bring it to life. So let me create this context for the next hour and our conversation with those two quotes to get you thinking. And John, if you would please take it away.
Well, thank you, Mallory, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm John Ramirez. To give you some background about myself, I had the fortunate opportunity to serve in the United States Army for 27 years, retired in 2004 after those 20 years of service, and immediately took on a position here at the University of Phoenix, and I've been associated with the College of Doctoral Studies now for almost 18 years. I'm born and raised here in Phoenix, outside of my time in the military. I'm a very strong advocate of our veteran population, our minority populations in the community. And I believe it's important that all of us do our part to serve our communities. And so thank you, Mallory.
Not at all. Okay, John, here is your first question, and it's a two-parter. What kinds of challenges do generational differences present for today's employers? And then, of course, what kind of challenges do generational differences present for today's employees?
Well, thank you, Mallory. Beginning with employers, I think there's three major challenges. I think number one is falling prey to the pitfalls of stereotyping, right, and the belief in different biases and even this context of generational differences, right? I think that when we start to put people in boxes, right, it is an injustice to them, and it's an injustice to the organization. And I would also say that it's important that people realize that, people are not stagnant. there's a maturation process that occurs. And so even though there's defined differences with different generations, whether you're a baby boomer who is supposed to be, stuck in their ways, right? Have no have challenges with technology and prefer a face-to-face type of interaction versus a, Gen Z who supposedly lack interpersonal skills. We've got to remember that people mature. People mature with time. People mature with knowledge. People mature with, the more education that they start to absorb. And so I think it's important that employers, try to avoid those pitfalls, right? Try to avoid the stereotyping and do what they can to help facilitate that maturation process, right? Which leads to the next challenge, which is communication, right? How do we communicate? If we get stuck in those biases and then we believe that there's a very specific way to communicate with different forms of different groups of people, we lose sight of the fact that they're all individuals and they're dependent upon the communications. There are different methods and different platforms. For example, that information that needs to go out organization-wide, right, needs to be clear, needs to be concise, needs to be transparent, needs the proper tone and the proper voice. Whereas when you're dealing with individuals, then yeah, you have to know their preference. Some prefer texts, some prefer emails, some prefer a video conference call or even a face-to-face. And so understanding the differences and the type of communication that you're trying to partake in is critically important. The final piece that I believe is, that the challenge for employers is the lack of training. It's not that we don't attempt to train our organization, especially with our leaders, but it's the quality and the context of that training. To simply put information out there that, we have 5 different generations that we're dealing with within the workforce, help the leaders understand the significant differences, how to engage with them, how to create a collaborative community, right? How to communicate with them and look at them rather than within the generational context, right? But remember that they're humans. And so take the human approach and treat each one of them as individuals and as human beings, right? Rather than boxing them into different categories. For employees, I think it's a little bit different. One, do they have trust in the organization, and do they feel that they have this respect that regardless of what generation they fit into, right, or supposedly fit into, that they feel they have those 2 things, from their leadership and from within the organization. I think too, the second one is also the stereotypical, categories that people are put into. We also fall prey to that, right? I'm considered a baby boomer. So do I try to live, through that stereotype? Or do I do everything I possibly can as an individual, right, to break through those barriers, right? Show that I've matured, show that I'm open, show that, that I'm inclusive to help the organization, help the team, and help myself. And then I think that the last piece is the training, right? Even if you're not in a leadership position, as an employee, do you get quality training? Are there opportunities, right, where within the organization, right, you have an opportunity to grow, right? That they have an invested interest in your success, and that they really have, and they do demonstrate a genuine care and concern, right, for everyone within the organization. Thank you,
Well, great.
Mallory.
Well, no, thank you, John. And I think you're right. I think when you're saying we're invested in everyone's success, I mean, the key there is everyone. I think while we're all different, we have a great many similarities as well. And I think we have to take advantage of that. So thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, Caleb, you're next, if you don't mind. What do the younger generations look for when evaluating a company's culture and the workplace? And as for yourself, if we can just put you on the spot a little bit, what are your own non-negotiables when looking for the right fit in a situation?
Yeah. So just a little brief introduction about
Please.
myself. I'm Caleb. I just graduated from Howard University, where I studied legal communications and a minor in political science. Yeah, and to answer your question, I'll start with the second part with myself. I'll say non-negotiables are like red flags for me is from top to bottom company, from top to bottom, there's not representation of people who look like me within your company. Like that's a major red flag. Because it's like, what do you guys, especially if like on your company website, you're claiming to be diverse and you're claiming to support these different values, but your company does not look like it, it's a red flag. Also, I'll say the work-life balance, you know, there's not one about like having a good work-life balance, especially for me, I'll say like coming after COVID and understand that a lot of people lost family members and like people, and understand that like there is more to life than just your job, and that there's more to, and that your life does not have to revolve around your job all the time. And so like understanding that like sometimes I'm not going to be at work today, or I'm not because I have a family event. I don't want to admit, like, I know personally, I don't want to work someplace that doesn't understand that like every 2 years during the summer, I'm going to have to take a few days off because I have a family reunion. Like I'm not missing my family reunion anymore. Right. And so, yeah, those are the two big things for me, just to understand like the work-life balance and the negotiables. And also, can you repeat the first part? I'm sorry. I'm
The
sorry.
first part,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
what does the younger generation look for when evaluating a company's culture and
Yeah.
the workplace?
Yeah. So I think also, like I said, work-life balance, diversity. And I think another big thing, I think that people, especially people like my friends, we're talking about is like a livable wage. Is like and when evaluating a company, because there's a difference between like getting entry-level salary and getting paid something that you can't live off of. Right. And so I think a lot of times when we're getting these job offers, we're getting paid where it's like, I can't even live off this. Right. Like we should be able to get a wage where I can pay my rent, my bills, and not have to eat ramen every night for dinner. So it's like, if you're not paying me something where like I can live and eat, it's like, why would I want to work for you guys? Like, you don't even want me to live, you know, you don't even care about how am I able to live outside of the company?
Mhm. Okay, great. Great. Well, that's it. It's a mutual respect, if you will, and you have to recognize that you give to get. I'm willing to participate if you are willing to participate as well, and we sort of meet that. So great. So thank you, Caleb. Okay, Erica, let's take advantage of some of your expertise. In today's diverse work environment, how does one realistically manage, okay, I've got a whole list: expectations, motivation, communication, feedback, performance, accountability. How does one realistically deal with that when we look around and we see more difference than similarity, and yet we're supposedly all on the same team?
Great question. So a little bit about me. My name is Erica
Please.
Scott, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I've been in human resources for over 20 some years now. I can't believe it. I've always been in Arizona. I was born in Oklahoma, but I've been here since I was 6 months old. So I'm not a native. I won't accept it. But my most recent role is I was the director of people and culture at a pharmaceutical company whose mission was to heal trauma with a combination of MDMA and therapy. So our goal was to heal the world with trauma. And I also have my own business called Civilian Connections, where I work with companies to help bridge the gap with veterans transitioning out of the military to help them find civilian work. There's just a transferable skills gap there. So I work with employers to identify that. So to answer your question, this is a really good question. And I love that. This is what HR spends their time doing, trying to figure out. So I'm going to go look at it in a couple different ways, because I think if you focus on a few things, it kind of addresses a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So the biggest, I guess, hurdle that companies have when you have all of this, when you try to do everything all at once and you try to do it all perfect, you don't get anything accomplished, right? So I always start with, what is your why and what is your goal when it comes to diversity? Right. So the biggest thing I hear from people who want to go work at companies, you know, they look at their website, like Caleb said, they look at their org chart and they're like, don't see a lot of representation. Why are you doing it? What is your goal? Did you put out that announcement when George Floyd happened and didn't say anything else? I mean, they're looking at all of those things, right? So getting really clear about your why and getting clear about who you are. And I always tell people, like, for you to acknowledge somebody else's identity, you have to know your own identity as a company. Right. So that gets into the data. I know that can be polarizing because this is a humanity conversation, but you have to know who you are. So, and I'm talking about race, gender, veteran status, disability. This is a conversation I want to hear more about. It's about abilities. And then you talk about it and you tell the company, this is who we are. This is our makeup. This is our demographics. And then you talk about what you're going to do about it. You have accountability at the executive level, you have measurements, and you have dates and deliverables, and you tell them and you give the company updates. The biggest thing I've seen is that companies have all these goals and these missions and things like that, but employees don't feel a part of it, or they don't believe you, right? And I think that the big thing is the employees know who you are. They know your demographics. Just acknowledge what it is and then keep yourself accountable, right? One of my favorite pages on Instagram, it kind of blew up when George Floyd and all of that happened, is Pull Up for Change. And it started out as a cosmetics Instagram page. And what they started doing is they reached out to all these companies and they said, you know what? I want you to pull up with your diversity data right now. And at first I'm thinking, none of these companies are going to do that. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And what I saw was a lot of companies said, this is who we thought we were, and this is actually who we are, and we're going to do something about it. And they had this accountability there. So I start with your identity and start with your why. I think the other thing is to companies, and I think as an individual, I think we need to accept that the systems and the processes and the structure that we have right now, there's implicit bias in it. It's just the way it is, right? So really being intentional about building a structure to minimize that, because whether you know it or not, I would teach this in HR, we all have bias. We just do. It comes from our family of origin, it comes from our background, it comes from our experiences. And it's just about being aware of those things. And I'm going to quote some other thought leaders. I'm going to quote some other people I want you to look up, because I want you to look into who is doing this really well. So I sat in front of a presentation for Adam Goodwin. It's a local company in Goodman in Arizona. And this is the CEO of this business. And he went on stage and said to everybody, this is how I found bias in my organization. And I'm going to tell you what I did about it. And you could have knocked me over with a feather, because it wasn't HR. It wasn't the diversity officer. It was the CEO of the company that said, the initial data said we were okay. We had enough women, we had enough minorities, people of color, but then he dug into it and found it and discovered his entire leadership team had bias. And he put structures in place to identify the skills and the attributes of the people and put a plan in place to invest in them, to develop them and get them on a career path to promotion, right? Just because they work in the warehouse doesn't mean they can't work for corporate. And he identified that he had this issue and he just sat on stage and told everybody. And I thought, that's where it has to start, right? I think the last thing I would say is, John talked about education. I think that's the biggest thing, but I think also is, when you learn something new, you're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to mess this up. That's the biggest fear about diversity. I hear people say, like, I'm going to mess it up. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Right. And I saw this on LinkedIn yesterday. It said, give people the space to fumble and the responsibility to repair. Okay. And the biggest thing that I see is when things happen in companies, and I've been involved in investigations where people have been misgendered, microaggressions, and people think it's going to be this unrealistic expectation. No, they just want you to fix it. They just want you to get clear on identity and get people trained up to respect pronouns, to respect their lifestyle, to respect who they show up as, so they don't feel isolated or feel shunned or feel stereotyped. So those are the big things. And I think the other thing is culture. Culture, I think the CEO or the former CEO of Southwest said, culture is what goes on when you turn your head away. How are you talking to people? How do you interact with people? How do you disagree? How do you welcome people in the organization? Lean into that culture, because the generations that are coming in, if your culture is not good, they'll leave. They'll leave. And the Great Resignation is really about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's great. No, and I think you're absolutely right. I know there's this quote, I'm not sure who said it, but culture eats strategy for lunch. And I do believe that, because we focus on how to do things, and yet we do not often take into consideration the context within which all of that is happening. And I think all of that is true. I also believe personally, I'm sure a lot of other people do, that culture comes from the top. So I think that you had a CEO standing up and doing and saying and dancing along with this, I think is amazing, actually, because very often, as you say, what's really going on in an organization? I've worked in organizations where I say, so tell me what your organization is like. Oh, people are our greatest asset. And we love this and we do that. And oh, we have a picnic, and and then it's sort of, okay, that's great. That's great. But spend some time in that organization, be a fly on the wall and see what's really going on there. And that's really what it's all about. And it's not a gotcha moment. It's really an awakening in terms of, you mentioned, who are you? What's important around here? And how do you want to connect, not only with your customers, but with each other? And I think those are all significantly important pieces to that. I'm going to come back to, as you said, talking about bias, because we can spend, again, a day on talking about that. When it comes to unconscious bias, particularly towards generational differences, where and why do we get stuck? And what advice do you have in terms of addressing it? And I'm going to just open this up to John and Erica and Caleb. Where do you think we get stuck? And what do you think we can do about it based upon your own lessons learned or your own experience?
And Mallory, if I may, I want to look at it from a leadership perspective, right?
Of course.
I think one of the challenges that we have when we're dealing with biases is that we don't spend enough quality time, right, looking in, right, and starting with me. What is it that I'm doing, right? What are those biases? What is my understanding of the differences of people? And then as leaders within an organization, understanding that the people that are leading your frontline employees, who you have designated as leaders, right, have been given the privilege to serve, right? And with that privilege comes responsibility. And we need to understand that leadership skills are perishable, right? What are we doing to help the leaders within the organization, right, better themselves, right? Really get involved, really dig deep. Again, starting with self-reflection, right? And then at the very top, and I agree with you 100%, right? Everything starts at the top. That the leader, the CEO, the person in charge, right? Not only has to talk the talk, right? But in actions, in deeds, and words, they have to resonate within the organization from the top all the way down. And there's continuous follow, continuous feedback. He has to check, she has to check with the workforce. Are they hearing? What is the message that they're hearing? Are we being effectively, are we effectively communicating? But, I agree with you 100% that, to breach, right, these biases and these stereotypical attitudes, right? It involves, starting from within. And then if you're responsible for the leaders within your organization, is making sure that you give them the skills, right? You give them the training, you give them the opportunities to learn, to help them navigate, through whatever challenges the organization is facing.
Great, thank you. Caleb, please.
And to piggyback off of John, I like to say, giving people grace and trying to meet them where they are. Just really trying to take yourself out of it and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And then also, I think one thing to get unconscious about for myself when it comes working with older people is that a lot of times when it comes to senior leadership and junior leadership, there's not a lot of community, we don't know each other. I don't know the people in the upper management. They don't come talk to us. I don't know them. They don't know me. So then that's where the biases come in, because we don't know each other. If you don't know the people who work for you, if I don't know the person I'm working for, then there's going to be automatic biases because there's not communication. There's just not communication. And so I think having a collaborative workforce where the people you're working with from top to bottom, your organization, your CEO cares about you, your upper management cares about you, whether it's it doesn't have to be something serious. You can just be walking by, hey, how are you guys doing? Introducing yourself. What you guys do this weekend? Building that camaraderie between all levels. It really tries to break down those biases and allows you to see them for who they are. And outside of the workplace, you see the real them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Erica, Erica, did you want to add something?
Yeah, these are all, Caleb and John covered it. I think the only thing I would add is, HR hears everything internally in the organization, especially with leadership, right? Because I think there's an assumption that people should come in with this knowledge, right? And there's some shame and guilt to where they just hide it, right? So they call me and they say, Erica, I don't interact with a lot of different people. For me, I don't know how to do that. And so I think for me, it's really about, and I'll give you an example. When I started working, I'm a civilian. I did not serve in the military, but I work with the veteran population. And a friend of mine told me, she's like, well, if you only work with veterans or talk to veterans in this space at this one time, you're not going to have a deeper understanding or even be uncover your own unconscious bias, right? So I think it's about investing, and I think I would love to think that the company is going to give you all the knowledge that you need to do this well. I think that's unrealistic, right? I think that you have to kind of take a step back and go, okay, how am I going to get the information and knowledge I need so I can be well-versed and aware and at least have empathy? I think that's the biggest thing here is you just want to have empathy. So when I was, start talking to veterans, I listened to podcasts, I read books, I went to the VFW and I sat there for 5 years and I listened and I didn't take space. I think the thing is that sometimes people want to do the right thing. And then now that they're aware of something, they want to do something. And I think and sometimes you have to take a step back and assess and listen, because I think that's where that epiphany comes in. And so when somebody opens up to you, like, okay, you heard me. You may not know what to do, but you heard me. So, and I think that's important.
Great. Well, thank you. So Caleb, let me ask you, how can the younger generations, let's talk specifically about the generations in the workplace. How can the younger generations relate more and better to older generations to support them in ways that everyone can be successful? And frankly, how would you suggest that older generations in that same workplace reciprocate and work with the younger generations? How can we sort of be in a circle with this, that it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about us?
I think one of the biggest things is like understanding that we come and we grew up in two completely different times. Like we, you know, the generation before me grew up very differently. And like I have a story, like I was in school and I called my granddad. My granddad called me, he was asking me how was I doing? I was like, Granddad, you know, I'm feeling a little burnt out, to be honest. He said, what's that? You know, like burnout to him was like, it's not a concept. There was not a thing. It was like, no matter how sick, tired you were, you got up and you went to work. And I think that illustrates the fundamental generational difference between my generation, his generation. Where like, I feel burnout all the time. Like, I'm not feeling it today. And he's like, you get up and go to work. Like, get over it. Like, you know, lace up your boots and get up and go to work, you know? And so I think to get over that, I think there needs to be, it's hard, but I think there needs to be understanding like where he came from and him understanding like where I'm at now. Like the worlds are different. And like there's there's a common ground where we can be like, you know what, you're right. You know, maybe I do need to get up, but also understand that burnout is a true, like two things can be very true at the same time. Understanding that like your point of view can be true, my point of view can both be true. But also we can find a common ground, you know, for each other. And I think, especially for young people like myself, I find myself like thinking, especially because I think my generation, we had access to a lot of information earlier, whether, you know, from YouTube, Google, whatever. So sometimes it feels like we can literally do anything and everything. We could figure it out. And so sometimes it might feel like we don't really need this older person to like help us, tell us what to do. I can do it through a Google search, but understand that like these people have probably been through it already, and they have a wisdom and a guidance that we could probably learn from. And we also can give them a perspective that they don't know from each other. So like understand, like come from a place of like trying to learn and understand from each other instead of a place of like, well, they don't know what he's talking about. He's a young, you know, millennial, and like, they don't know what they're talking about. He was born in 55. Like they're just, you know, those. So just trying to come from a place of like learning, understanding.
Great. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because what you're talking about, I think resonates with me as well. And yes, I had a grandpa too. And, you know, again, the whole notion of social norms, I think that this is the way it is, you know, and I think back, I mean, I wasn't there when the Wright brothers flew their plane, although sometimes I feel like I could have been, but I think it's the kind of things that we take for granted, and it's the kind of things that we have a really hard time taking for granted, if you will. And I think that whole notion about social norms, really, we create them. You know, as John agreed with me earlier about the notion of leadership and being at the top, you know, you make the rules, if you will. And so, you know, you sort of recognize, where does that come from? Where does that come from? Although I do believe, and I have a feeling you do too, that change can come from anywhere within an organization, on campus, within a community. I mean, it does not reside exclusively in the C-suite by any means. But I think we have a responsibility in terms of recognizing what those social norms are and how we can contribute to changing them if they are not making sense. Let me ask you then, what is one social norm you can think of as part of your work experience in terms of, gosh, we have to do something about this, or boy, I didn't realize I could be lucky enough to work in an environment that had this. And social norms can be something of as mundane as who has lunch with whom, as who gets promoted and who doesn't. So I think it's sort of, how do you look at that? And this comes back to Erica's point about the culture. How do you look at that culture and say, it agrees with me and I appreciate it and I want to be part of it, or the opposite of that, or something in between. How do you negotiate that as either a leader or an employee, as an employer or an employee? What do you think?
That's a good question. I would say the biggest, because I have to get buy-in. Like, why do I care about this, right? Because the systems in place have worked for some people, right? So why do we want to change it now? The biggest way I've gotten buy-in is to bring to the table who we are as an organization, the skill set and the missed opportunity cost of turnover and people just leaving because we're not giving them what we need. We're not giving them flexibility. So let's just break down what people want. Flexibility. They want to be paid their worth. Caleb said a livable wage. Hopefully it's more than livable. It is your worth based on your skills and talents and abilities and value you bring to the organization. They want a career path. Why am I here? And I grew up in corporate America where you didn't ask your WIFM too early. What's in it for me? You just took what you got and you kind of just worked your way up. This generation's coming and saying, what's in it for me, right? And then also they're coming in and they're looking for workplaces that reflect who they are and are supporting them based on where they are at this point in their life, right? So the challenge in HR is we have all these generations in the workplace, and I came up where if I gave you medical, dental, vision, we're good. We're good. No, not anymore, right? We've got a focus on mental health, right? Supporting that. I think COVID has caused an isolationism and people suffer in silence, right? And I'm excited that there's this conversation about mental health support because I was told to hide it in corporate America. I was told to hide whatever's going on in the world. I don't care if it's a shooting. I don't care if it's violence. I don't care if it's gas prices going through the roof. I just had to pretend like it wasn't going on. That doesn't cut it.
Well, and let me butt in here. You know, I spent about 10 years working with the Department of Defense, and talk about an environment which does not sanction or tolerate any form of mental illness in any shape or form. If you are not fit for duty, I don't want to hear it. It's as simple as that. So when you talk about, again, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what's the social norm and what's not the social norm. I don't know, John, if you experienced or witnessed any of that when you were in the service, but that was certainly something that was brought home to me in a significant way. And again, I don't know if that's a generational thing. I don't know if, I don't think so. I think, as you said, Erica, COVID sort of changed the rules, if you will, on what's acceptable and what's not, and how we support our staff and our team and how we don't. But that is certainly something that I noticed as well.
Mallory, if I may,
Please.
COVID really gave me an opportunity to leverage my experiences in the military, and let me explain why. Prior to deployments, and one of the important functions of a leader, regardless of whether it's a squad leader that is responsible for 5 people or a brigade command sergeant major that has a couple of thousand, the importance of knowing your people, right? Knowing, their level of training, right? Knowing their concerns, knowing their fears, right? Knowing if they're prepared, right? Not just physically, but mentally. And also important is knowing that their families are being taken care of, especially before deployment and during the deployment.
Mm-hmm.
And those functions, those skills that I was taught there, I had the opportunity to think back and leverage them right at the beginning of COVID, because for the first time in this civilian environment, right, was it really now a matter of life and death, right? Before you come to work, you do what you got to do, you socialized a little bit, you went home. But now you're dealing with people who have genuine fears, fear for their own health, their own safety, the fear of their families, the fear of their friends, the fear of their job. What's happening, especially early on. And so I think that I hope, as much as I was able to remember that and leverage that and deal with each one of, my folks, right, and really know what those fears were, just to engage with them individually, to engage with them as a collective group. How can I help you? What do I need to do to support you? Right? Are you okay? I hope that all of us learn something through this pandemic experience, right? That you have to now take the time to really understand what's happening within the organization, what's happening within people. You cannot use, right, what you did in the past as a tool for success. You really have to know your people. You really have to know them as individuals, and you have to know, right, what is it that motivates them? What is it that concerns them? What is it that gives them purpose? And I think when doing that combined with, trying to create this collaborative partnership where everyone is also taking care of each other, right? Because that was another fundamental trait that I found in the military, right? And that I still miss, even being out, all these years, was the camaraderie and the teamwork. We all knew each other. We all took care of each other. We may not have agreed all the time, right? And there may be differences, but you knew who had your back. You knew who was, to your right. You knew who, was to your left. And you knew that we're all coming home together. And so I just had to reflect on that because it was the pandemic provided a unique opportunity for me, and I hope for all leaders.
No, and thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it, certainly. Erica, let me ask you, when I think about diversity, when I think about mental health, when I think about EAPs, when I think about any of that stuff in the office, I always say, oh, that's an HR issue. So, everything may fall on your desk or in your inbox, et cetera. So, and I know that's not true. Actually, I know that HR provides a service that is just, you can't even begin to say how much they do in an organization. So I want to say how much I have appreciated working with folks who do that incredible job. But let me ask you, I know you talked about what's happening in terms of your own work and in terms of your own focusing as the world is changing. What is HR? What can HR, let me phrase it that way, what can HR do to support this in terms of making these environments work better for everyone? So what can HR do to contribute to this environment and make it better and supportive? And the flip side of that is, and what can we do as employees, as staff, as members of this work community, if you will? What are some of the things that we can do ourselves and say, you know what, I can do that tomorrow? Please.
Yeah. So I would say HR, so there's two places where we spend a lot of our time right now. We call it total rewards, because, for a while it was like everybody talked about money, compensation. And while compensation is important, that's not the thing that's going to keep people in your organization. It's just not. I've seen a lot of people leave jobs for lots of reasons, especially if you work in a toxic environment. So we spend time trying to figure out what we can give to people to support them. Right. And we have to do it across generations. Right. So just in, my previous role, I had to, and just in my department, I had to look at supporting somebody who was a caretaker. I had to look at somebody who was supporting an aging parent. I had to help support somebody who was doing through a fertility journey. I had to work with somebody who was going through a transition. This was a trans individual who was actually going through the surgical procedure and discovered very quickly that our benefits did not cover it, which was a shock to me. And then we also have to deal with financial wellness, right? So we've got all these generations. You have people who are going to retire, people who are just coming in. What do you do with that? And I can't remember what the statistic is, but there's the number is 75% of people are in a financial situation that they don't know how to get out of. They don't know what to do. So what we focus on is bringing resources to help people, educate people, get them positioned where they don't have to stress about that. The other thing we focused on in talking about COVID, this has been a tough, is it 3 or 4 years now this has been going on? And there's new variations. And just talk about everything that's going on. That's a lot of stress and that's a lot of trauma that's right in your face. And sometimes you can't even avoid it. Right. So HR is focusing on making sure the workplaces or communities are trauma informed. And what that is just being aware of trauma and the negative impact on the organization's employees. So really focusing on Harvard Business Review had a really good article about it in March of this year and really broke it down into acknowledgement. Okay, making sure our employees feel acknowledged, making sure leaders aren't, whatever's going on in the world, you can't ignore it anymore. You can't bring that into the workplace, acknowledging it and making sure people feel seen. And that is representation, that's identity, that's pronouns, that's all of it. Support. That's what HR is bringing. Also educating the managers, because the most important relationship in an organization is that supervisor, right? Yeah. If I come to you and I say, I'm struggling, Mallory, and I need help, and you say, whoa, let me call HR. That breaks that responsibility. So educating them on how to be trauma informed and to have that conversation with people. I think the last thing is trust. I think, John, you said that. People have to trust you. And think about it. You see all these layoffs that are happening right now. Individuals trusted you with their livelihood. And if you're making bad business decisions, that impacts everything. Everyone. Let's just be honest, that's economic trauma. right? That's what that is. So that's really what we're focusing on, in addition to holding all of the emotions and being a support system, but also making sure we have resources that are appropriate at the right time for the right person, but also give a level of confidentiality too. Sometimes I don't need to know your business. I just have to put the structure in place where you can get to what you need.
Well, thank you for letting me take advantage of you, because that was really a loaded question and I do appreciate it. But what you brought up, which was an incredible light bulb in my head, was, yes, I have financial stuff, I have family stuff, I have this, that, and the other. And you multiply that by 5 generations, because I may have it, you may have it, John may have it, Caleb may have it, but we have it in a whole different way. And so it's not only, well, I've got to turn to HR, how can we turn to each other? And not in a dependent kind of obnoxious way, if you will, but really in a way that we support each other, that we recognize, again, it sounds awfully hokey, but we really are all in this together. And I think if we want to succeed, if our organization wants to succeed, we all have to succeed. And so we sort of have to recognize that, as I said. So I'm taking a look at the time right now, and I can't believe it, quite frankly, how quickly the time has passed. I'd like to go back to Saray and Tandra. Do we have questions from the audience that we would that you would like us to field, or should we just sort of continue rambling?
Well, you all are doing so much more than rambling. I'll tell you that, Dr. Titel, this has been such a great webinar. I am trying to work behind the scenes and taking notes feverishly as well. We do have 2 questions. They're really good and they may take some time, so let's go ahead and jump into them. The first question that we received is, what is the connection between unconscious bias and microaggressions?
Ooh,
Who wants to take that one?
okay. Okay, Caleb, I saw you getting ready to raise your hand.
I'll say, because I get this a lot in workplaces, is like, because I'm tall, I'm like 6'2". And so a lot of times when I'm in the office, the first thing what people say to me is be like, well, they'll try to like start a conversation, is they'll be like, oh, so you played basketball when you were in high school, when you were younger? Like, oh, like you play basketball? Like, hate it. I absolutely hate it. And it's like, I understand it's like you're trying to like come from a place, but it's like, if I were white and tall, would you assume I play basketball? Like, I don't think you're asking Zach next to me if he's playing basketball, because, right? And so I think it's like these unconscious bias was like, you're associating me with basketball because of my skin color, right? Like, that's unconscious, like, you're not doing it intentionally, like, you're just trying to make conversation, but now you're creating an environment for me, you know, like saying like, oh, you're asking me if I play basketball. That's a microaggression, because I get that a lot. And it's like, okay, like I know where it's coming from. And now I'm uncomfortable because of your unconscious bias. And it's like there's a connection between the two, because it's like I try not to hold it against them, because you don't know what you don't know, but also it's your responsibility to know it as well. Like I'm not supposed to teach you. Like you should know that.
So let me ask you a follow-up, if you will. So what do you do? Do you sort of laugh it off? Do you, again, seriously, what do you do in that moment?
Yeah.
Take a teachable moment and not,
So when it happened when I was younger, I used to laugh it off, but like it got to a point, like a couple years ago, I was like, I'm not laughing it off again. I'm sick of it. So like when they'd be like, did you play basketball? No, I didn't actually. I don't like basketball at all, actually. That's just like no, like there's no like. And so when there's always an awkward science where it's like, did you play basketball? No, there's like an awkward science. And I think it makes them realize that like, why did there's always that second where it's like, okay, like, why did I ask him, did he play basketball? Like, why did I automatically assume that? And it's like, oh yeah, I don't. So I think it's those, I think you really have to like, just shut it down. Like just immediately be like, no, I don't. No, like, no, like there's no question. There's no laughing about it. It's just a straight no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Was there a part 2 to that question, Tandra?
There is a part 2 that kind of came up in the chat, but before we go to part 2, I want to see if John or Erica have anything to add to that.
I was gonna applaud Caleb. I mean, he did an incredible job explaining it. It does, I mean, and I think, most folks, whether they realize it or not, have been a subject to, right, unconscious bias. I mean, and I think it's in the past it was always perceived, right, that it was a Caucasian that was showing this bias towards someone of color, but it's now both ways, right? And we have to recognize that. We can't assume, right, that someone that is Caucasian, right, is anti, Black Lives Matters, right? Is anti, whatever, is anti this or anti that. And so I think we have to be very conscious of who we are and what is coming out of our mouths, right? And I think, again, it goes back to educating ourselves, right? And really trying to understand and asking sometimes questions, right? Where are you from, right? What do you like, right? How do you prefer that I address you? I mean, it's just, I think a lot of it is just communication, but it could be extremely dangerous. And Caleb mentioned the fact that you would think, some folks may say, well, that was a compliment because they thought you were athletic, right? But it didn't affect Caleb that way, right? And he recognized that and, responded to it as he started to mature, right? I'm not going to sit back and just have people, ask me or approach me that way. And so, Caleb, I applaud you because, again, I think you did a great job explaining it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Erica,
I love
anything?
that.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I love that you made that comment, John. And I love that you have changed the way that you respond to that question, Caleb, because I know that there's another comment in the chat asking if it would be a microaggression to ask if a tall person played basketball just because they are tall, because they've asked this of people who are any race. But I think what's important to understand, and that's why we have these webinars, that's why we're having these discussions, is there is a second part to that, right? Asking Caleb if he plays basketball because he's tall is also making an assumption that he doesn't have the level of intelligence to graduate from the Howard University. It doesn't, it's a microaggression because it's an assumption that's made based solely on appearance. And without actually asking questions, as John stated, you're not taking the time to get to know someone. So maybe asking someone, well, where did you go to school and what did you study? Did you play any sports? And then that's a better way of approaching it. So I hope that answers the question in the chat. The second kind of part two that someone asked is, what are safe icebreakers? And this is a really good one. How are we supposed to get to know each other without inadvertently offending each other? I'd love to hear from you all on that one.
I would say HR does icebreakers, and they're especially hard in Zoom. I think when we were in person, you could do icebreakers in person and build that rapport and that relationship. But I think it's a little more, you have to be careful in a virtual environment, right? So I always go back to what somebody taught me when I was networking. I can default to, a stereotype, or, I could say, oh, John was a veteran, he was in the military or whatever, but I could share, tell me something interesting about you. Tell me something you're passionate about. Tell me something that inspired you to make a change in the world or do what you do for a living. So let's talk about that. So I think you lead with curiosity, and you lead with an intent of really getting to know the person versus judging what you see. Because I think the tricky part with diversity is people have hidden things about them. They have hidden disabilities. They have hidden neurodiversities. They have all these different things. And if you're making an assumption, you may inadvertently commit a microaggression. So I think it's getting beyond what you see in front of you and getting really curious about the person and curious about their identity. And leading with that. And in my experience, that typically opens a conversation. And I think it relaxes that, because whether we know it or not, someone is usually on the receiving end of microaggression. So their guard is up, right? Their guard is up. And if they can see, okay, this person's really curious about me, and not leading with, tell me what your pronouns are because you look different. That kind of makes it a little more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I tend to ask a simple question, right? I tend to say, tell me a little bit about yourself, right? And it affords them the opportunity to share what they want to share, right? They could either tell me their entire life story, right? Or they can give me a, 2-word sentence or response. And from there, then I can start to ask, more open-ended questions and ask a little bit more about them. So I think trying to keep it simple, right? So that it's not, offensive, is really the best way to, break the ice. And, I think when you start going into even stuff like, what's your sports preference, or, where did you grow up, or, are you from the East Coast? Remove all those assumptions. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, right?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think that, and you said it, Tandra, when you said curiosity. I would say whatever activity or question or icebreaker, energizer you are proposing, I think it is about curiosity. It's about exploration also. And I think you have certainly being careful, but you have to really be diligent in eliminating those assumptions, because when you phrase a question like that, it's about you. When you phrase a question differently, as you suggested, it's about them. You are not putting yourself in the question. The question is really about them, that you are really opening it up in every possible way. Whereas if you say, hey, I see how tall you are, blah, blah, that's a whole, then you're closing it down as opposed to opening it up. So that's my 2 cents, certainly. And Caleb, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Everybody answered it for me. It was great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you all. I will add one thing. I think just if we think about Caleb's story about his conversation with his grandfather and what John has mentioned, being a leader over the years, and Erica and Mallory talking about what we used to go to HR for and what we should be responsible for now. When it comes to icebreakers, let's just get rid of the activities. These activities that you may have done when you first started working, however many years that was ago. If we try to implement those today, they probably won't be accepted. And I'll share a quick story just because this was an actual activity that I didn't recognize kind of had a hidden microaggression. It made me feel like I didn't really belong, but I didn't recognize it. Until my very informative colleague, Saray, pointed it out to me. But we actually had an icebreaker team building activity once where we had to share baby pictures. How many people have done that, right? So I'm thinking to myself, if we have to share these baby pictures, there are 2 Black women on this team. So which baby picture am I going to share? Because they're going to know it's one of the 2, right? And my mother is biracial, but she's white passing. So I thought, maybe I find a picture when I'm really young and my mom is in the picture, right? Because that'll throw them off. I hadn't really thought through the activity at all. And then I was talking to Saray about it, and she's like, that's why I don't like these activities. And it dawned on me, I'm participating without even realizing it, right? This is the work that we do, and I'm participating in it without even understanding. So I think one of the other things that you want to keep in mind is even with the questions that you're asking, I would say John's advice that keeping it simple is best, but also make sure that you're thinking through whether or not this question is going to make that person feel like they don't belong. And is it specific to your interests? Like if it's about movies and music, you guys might be on a whole different wavelength. So I say let's get rid of the activities. We do have one more question. We only have 2 minutes left, but I'm going to ask it and then we'll wrap up. If each of you could give a quick response. I think this is a good one. And it says, I often feel a disconnect with my coworkers due to being so much younger than the rest of my team. This is actually my question because I'm younger than everyone. Just kidding. Our water cooler talk is usually about things that happened before I was born or revolves around grandchildren or retiring. Any tips and tricks on ways to connect better with them in spite of a 15+ year gap between us? So we're going to do a lightning round, have everyone provide their response to this question.
I'll jump in as being actually the youngest one of the group. I would just encourage them to try to divert the conversation in such a way where you're talking about, hey, anything interesting that you can share with me that I can use to help myself, right? Or help me within the organization, right? Because what you'll find, especially as people mature, is they do have a willingness to help those that are younger, right? They really, it's part of your personal identity, your personal legacy. And so I think when you get in those water cooler discussions and you're reaching out saying, any words of wisdom that you can share with me, or any, tidbits of information that, that you can help me with, I think can maybe stifle some of that. Because you're right, people love to share pictures of grandbabies and children and all the things and talk old school, we have conversations with my little collective group about, old LPs and 8-track tapes, and people are scratching their head saying, what are you talking about? Right. And so, but no, I just think, it is, there may be lessons in that, even in those conversations, you started to learn a little bit about them and what they value, right? I mean, if they're talking about their grandchildren, their families, that may be the most important thing to them, right? And again, it's a takeaway, right? Something you can benefit from.
I'll say for me, being in this situation, I try to find things that like we have in similar, like common. So like I'll like go to their LinkedIn, or like I'll ask them, like one of my favorite questions is like, when you were my age, what advice would you wanted to give to yourself? Like that creates a conversation, just trying to relate in the workplace kind of way. Cause it's true, if you're 20 years older than me, we're not going to have that much in common. Like we're in two completely aspects of life. So like personally, we might not have a lot, but there also is still a room for a dialogue and for us to relate about certain things as well.
Yeah, and I'll be quick. The only thing I'd add is I think that you have commonalities with somebody. You work together. Go, do you like working here? What brought you here? When I came here, I was this. What about you? Just talk about, and I think it will naturally evolve into other things. But I think you have to align and connect on what you know. It might be, this piece is terrible. Before we used to get this. Do you like it? Like that kind of thing, right? So I think it's about building rapport and building some kind of connection versus, because people will default to what they're comfortable with, but kind of just get a conversation going. It will naturally happen because then you have a connection with them.
Well, I will just quickly jump in. Oh, maybe not. I've been in the position where, like Tandra, occasionally I've been the youngest person in the room, and then occasionally I've been the oldest person in the room. So I think my takeaway from that is think back to what that felt like, and then how can you use that feeling and that thought to sort of equalize the environment or the temperature. Was that a good feeling? Was that not a good feeling? And then how can you make it good or better for someone else?
Thank you, Dr. Titel, and thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for your contribution today. This was a great discussion. I wish we had more time so that we can talk more, but we got through all of the topics and you also answered the questions. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our participants for joining us. We hope that you all will join us next month for our next webinar on facilitating belonging and diversity trainings. Just a sidebar, Erica mentioned trauma-informed care and trainings. I think that is probably going to be a webinar that we have in the near future. Just listening to you speak about it, I think that is prevalent and we want to make sure we bring that. So be on the lookout. Also, this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available along with part 1 and all of our other webinars on our YouTube. So feel free to scan the QR code here, scan the QR code and join us next month. Thank you all. We're 3 minutes over, but this was a fantastic hour. Have a great afternoon and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.